Good morning, everyone. We are in the process of going through a sequence of talks on the different disciples of the Buddha. And today I'm going to talk about the great householder Citta, who was one of the lay disciples of the Buddha, householders like most of us here. Citta, C-I-T-T-A, means mind in the language of Pali. His name was Citta Gahapati. Gahapati means householder, so Citta the householder. In Chinese, his name is not the word mind, but something I should explore a little bit more at a later date with Chinese speakers. His name was Zhiduo, so I'm not exactly sure why that is, but maybe someone can help me. It's a transliteration from the Sanskrit. So who was the householder Citta? He was a person who was considered a very good teacher of the Dhamma, of the teachings, and he was a model for the Buddhist lay disciples. He was a wealthy merchant at one time who owned a whole hamlet in an area of the state of that was of Kasi. That was, if you imagine India to be like an upside-down triangle, it would be in the upper right area. And he presented to the Sangha a very spacious monastery in a grove that he had owned, and many bhikkhus would come and dwell there. And he is so devoted to the Buddha, and this is explained that he had been a servant of a bodhisattva in a former life, and it followed him into homelessness. So this state called Kasi is quite well known because it has the Ganges River going through it, and the capital now of the state is Varanasi in ancient times, and it contained this grove, Ambata Grove or Ambatakavana, which Citta, as I said, built a monastery there. And the presiding monk of this monastery, his name was Mahanama. So Mahanamatera, this is his full ordained name, was also from Savatthi, and he heard the Buddha once give a Dharma talk, and he immediately entered the order, and he really worked very hard at meditation. Mahanana did. He was very devoted to meditation, but his negative thoughts kept arising in his mind, and he was so upset with himself that he decided to climb a steep crag and throw himself over. But one of the arahats, seeing him do this, called out to him at that moment, and he had this awakening or insight, and he himself became an arahat at that moment rather than to throw himself over the cliff. I don't recommend this, by the way. There might not be an arahat nearby. So when the Buddha gave talks to the lay people, he said a lay follower is not to choose a bhikkhu as his model, but a lay disciple. And a bhikkhu should not choose a lay disciple as a model, but to choose a bhikkhu. And the Buddha stressed that to be a devoted lay disciple should foster the wish to become like Citta or another lay disciple, Hatata, while devoted spiritual bhikkhus should aspire to be like Sariputra and Mahamoggallana. So these were the examples that the Buddha gave. So this is found in a number of the suttas where the Buddha gives a list of those lay people, and Citta is always on the list of the lay people who are a very good example. These two, Citta and Hatata, are models and guiding standards for my lay disciples. The mother may then continue, but if you should decide to become a monk, my dear, then try to imitate Sariputra and Mahamoggallana. So the Buddha also mentioned three persons who excelled in expounding the Dhamma, the teachings, and one of those happened to be this householder, Citta. There's a story about Citta and a particular monk whose name was Sudama. And in this story, Citta was actually a student of Sudama and was very devoted to him. And one day, Sariputra, of course, the very closest disciple to the Buddha, came to Citta and asked him to come and give a talk to the assembly. And this is very rare. And Citta was so surprised and excited, but he forgot to invite his teacher, Sudama, right away. And after a day or two, he realized, I had made a mistake, so he made sure that Venerable Sudama knew that he was going to give a talk, but Venerable Sudama actually was experiencing some of his own afflictions, and he got jealous and reprimanded Citta for not having told him soon enough. And although Citta invited him to the talk and to the meal and everything, Sudama continued to scornfully decline going. But eventually, Sudama went to the talk and made some kind of sarcastic remark after Citta's talk and hospitality. So this sarcastic remark, some of the venerables heard this, and Citta attempted to kind of give a little bit of a teaching on giving a sarcastic remark, and this teaching had kind of like an inner meaning. He just told a story about how a person had once tried to breed a crow and a hen, and whenever the hen tried to make a sound like a hen, he would sound like a crow, and when the crow tried to make a sound like a crow, he sounded like a hen. Apparently this was something that everyone understood as being kind of like saying, well, your manners are not so good. I'm not sure I would have gotten that at the time. Yes. So this information about his behavior actually got all the way to the Buddha. And the Buddha called Sudama in and said, "Foolish man, what you did was unseemly, improper, and discourteous, not the way of an ascetic. How could you meanly insult and show disdain for a devoted, faithful lay disciple, a benefactor and supporter of the Sangha?" At a meeting of the Sangha, it was decided that Sudama should call on the householder Citta and ask him for forgiveness. So Sudama went to ask forgiveness, but halfway there, he became embarrassed, and he turned around and went back, and when the monks asked him, "Did you apologize?" he said, "No," and so the Buddha actually had to have another monk go with him to ask for Citta's pardon, which he gave immediately. So this is kind of rare that a lay disciple would be in a position of actually giving a correction and also being apologized to by a bhikkhu, but it kind of shows that even the bhikkhu, if he behaves in a way that's inappropriate, that has to take a stock of that himself. But Citta himself, he was not fully enlightened. He had his issues as well. In one occasion, a person by the name of Isiddhata came to a group of people who were having a discussion group. And Citta posed a question to one of the monks, and the monk couldn't really answer the question very well. And so then Isiddhata asked if he could answer the question, and Citta said yes, and he answered it so well that Citta was very impressed. And afterwards he said to Isiddhata, "Oh, you've done such a great job giving this talk. Please allow me to be the person who sponsors you, who gives you requisites." This is taking care of his needs, his robe, bowl, and any other items that he would need, shaving, etc. And apparently he did this in a way that made Isiddhata feel uncomfortable, because Isiddhata left and we don't hear about him anymore in any of the suttas. This is not the only time that this happens. I'll explain another occasion upon which this happened, but in between, Citta went to visit the Buddha, and he was accompanied by 2,000 others, and took with him 500 cartloads of offerings to the Buddha and to the order. And when he fell at the feet of the Buddha, the flowers of the 5 hues showed from the sky, and the Buddha preached to him the Salayatana Vibhati Sutta, which is a very deep sutta called the analysis of the 6 sense media, which is not usually given to laypersons. So it was a very auspicious occasion that the Buddha would give such a profound talk. There was another occasion where Citta was questioning certain monks, and there was a monk by the name of Kamabu, who Citta put to him 11 abstract questions concerning the 3 types of formations, these sankhara. We were talking about this in our group. There are 3 types of sankhara, and the monk was having trouble answering these questions. So in this situation, Citta was interested to have him discuss these 3 different types of formations. I should say something. These are kind of like the habit energy of the body, speech, and mind. And these things are occurring on a regular basis within us, kind of automatically. The automatic energy, or the habit energy of the body, is the breath. So when we do meditation, oftentimes when we start off in meditation, we're focusing specifically on our breathing, because that's the habit energy of the body. The habit energy of the speech is this chattering that goes on inside the mind. This is put into 2 categories. The first being the initial thought itself, which is called vitaka, and the continued kind of storyline and analysis and investigation that we put into this thought, which is called vichara. And these 2 really occupy the mind very, very much in a habitual kind of way. And whenever we sit and we say, okay, let's focus on the breath or on the body, sometimes we realize how much talking is going on inside of our mind, how much chattering. And so we want to calm that down. And then the third is the mind itself. which is different than the internal speech. And this mind itself has to do with perception and feeling. So to go beyond perception and feeling is even a very much more profound state. So he was asking this question about these three and when do they subside? That was one of the questions. One of the things that Citta would do, which was a little unusual, is he would make a point frequently that he himself has been able to attain all four of the form jhanas. It's not usual for people to go around saying what level of mind they were able to attain. We don't usually talk about this because we don't want to become involved in self-pride. We don't want to inspire envy or jealousy in others. And sometimes we don't really even know if what we're experiencing is really what we say that we experience. So that can be a problem as well. But apparently Citta was someone who would talk about this quite freely. So he gave this teaching about how it was that when the volitional factors, these three habit energies, when do they subside? So the first one would subside would be those of the speech energy, the speech formation. And that subsides in the second of the four formless jhanas. And when does the mind jhana begin to evaporate? This I believe, if I remember, I have to read what it says here because I don't know about this, but I think that the mind is next, and that takes place, I think, in the fourth jhana, and then the body is in the eighth jhana. But don't quote me on that, because that I think is the case. Now, the verbal fabrications grow on, still attaining until the second jhana, the bodily fabrications until the fourth jhana, the bodily ones until the fourth, and the mental fabrications grow until the attaining of the final of the 8 jhanas, the cessation of perception and feeling. So, good that I checked that out. So there are these different higher levels of these states of concentration that are very refined that we might get into at another time. So the final question that was asked that Citta answered himself, because the monk was not sure how to answer all of these questions. The Venerable Kamabu was able to answer these questions, and he was able to answer this last question as well. He says, when a monk has emerged from the cessation of perception and feeling, what happens? And he says the 3 contacts make contact. What are these 3 contacts? Contact with emptiness, contact with signlessness, and contact with the undirected. So this is very interesting, because for those of us who study the Mahayana, the later school, there is a teaching called the 3 Samadhis, San Samme. And these 3 Samadhis, sometimes called the 3 gates of liberation, are the same 3 gates that are talked about in this particular answering of questions. The first is the emptiness, the second is signlessness, and the third is wishlessness. So we can see that teaching goes all the way back to the original teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha also asked Kamabu about this question of seclusion. When a monk has emerged from the cessation of perception and feeling, his mind leads to seclusion, tends to seclusion, inclines to seclusion. And it's important to note here that in the commentary and also in the teachings that we receive here, that seclusion is not the same at all as going off and being by yourself. Seclusion is, in fact, what's called the removing oneself from being fettered, also called the unbinding. So here a person is able to cut themselves off, not from human contact or contact from the world, but able to cut themselves off from craving and attachment. This is what is meant by seclusion. And I've asked Master to, at some time soon, to give a talk just on seclusion, because, and I wrote a note to Venerable Konyen, who was very nice to write back to me and give me some additional understanding of this topic, because it's quite profound. And rather than to try to explain it in the way that I understand it, I think it would be better for us to hear from the Master on this point. So Citta actually gave his own explanation about this as a simile. He says, as a pair of oxen, the white one is not fettered to the black one, and the black one is not fettered to the white one, but both are fettered by a single rope or yoke strap, so that the sense faculties have no power to bind the external to the external objects, and the external objects have no power to bind the sense faculties, but they are yoked by craving. So the objects themselves don't have any control over our mind. And our mind doesn't have any, our senses, we call our sense faculties, don't have any control over the object. But the way in which they're connected to each other is through craving. So learning how to detach from this craving, this is what we mean by seclusion. Another occasion that the Buddha, Citta was very impressed by a bhikkhu who had some kind of supernatural kind of power, and he was very impressed by this. And he said to this monk, he says, "Oh, you're so well advanced that I'm going to please, if you would, allow me to take care of all of your personal requisites, taking care of any food or new robes or any of the other items that the 7 or 5 items that the monk has. Please allow me to make sure that you have them." And this monk also, after Citta told him this, he also disappeared. So Buddhaghosa in the Visuddhimagga makes a comment about this, and he says that they disappeared because they didn't want to be recognized. This is the only word that's used. And it's not really explained what is meant by being recognized, but I think that one of the things that monastics are very part of their training is to not ask for any kind of special treatment, not to be praised in this kind of way or to be admired in a particular way, and to be flattered. And when these things happen, they step back. They don't want this kind of treatment. And so it could very well be that Citta, as a layperson, maybe he got too enthusiastic at times and wanted to praise this person instead of just looking at it from the point of view of, oh, this person has a good understanding of the teachings, is a good follower of the Buddha, rather than to praise them in this way. But we know that we all have, particularly as lay people, we have our misunderstandings. So as good of a teacher as Citta was, he had some of his own difficulties and misunderstandings along the way. He was always aiming at something higher, more noble and peaceful. He was seeking Nibbana throughout his life, and at the time of his death, it's said that Citta was asked if he wanted to become in his next life, to be a world monarch of the Devas, to be in charge of the Devas. And he said, no, I don't want any of those kinds of things. I just want to be a simple monk in my next life. So by the time of his passing, he was only interested in being able to attain the state of being able to be fully enlightened. So this is my short Dharma talk today that I wanted to share with you, so that we have a good understanding that the householder is really capable of making great progress. It's not required that all of us become monks. If we all became monks, that would be perfectly fine, but we're not all going to be monks. I'm not going to have that opportunity myself in this life, so going to do my best just to be a good lay disciple. And so a person like Citta is a big inspiration, because I can see that if I continue to practice well, I may be able to have some better understanding of the practice. I may be able to calm my mind even more and become a better person, be able to be of greater benefit to others. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings never be separated from the sacred joy which is free from suffering. And may all beings dwell in the great equanimity which is free from attachment, aversion, and ignorance.